stay humble, especially when you're in the space where creativity it's inspired. So keeping a humble mind and spirit keeps you at abreast of what is happening in the world. So yes, my name is Ditiro Mashigo. I am a textile and fashion designer, born in Limpopo and relocated to Pretoria in the early 90s. I have always had a very strange disconnect to the city and never really accepted the label of city girl, you know? I grew up being exposed to craft and sewing, so being an artist was more of a vocation that chose me. And I was fortunate enough to be supported in this regard. So when the time came for me to then self-identify, because then I grew up not wanting to be a city girl, I loved the creative space. I knew that I was traditional and contemporary, but because I was young, I did not necessarily have the vocabulary to articulate this very dynamic sort of sense of being. In my third year of fashion, I then chose to be Serati, taken from the Sepedi idiom which states, "Mabeluja Serati sekgethela ga se nyake." This embodied what I believe to be the contemporary South African woman. At the time, and even now, I still believe that one who truly does what their heart desires is one who is most happiest, most brightest, most courageous, and brave in whatever they do. And this is an ethos I then believed would carry the brand of Serati forward. My graduate collection was showcased at AFI in 2014 and then SANA that very same year. After graduating from fashion, I knew I needed to differentiate. Now, a short backstory, I've always been in the arts, but until tertiary, I only studied commerce. So, in essence, I was more or less business and finance inclined, but I knew that I was a creative. So, establishing a business made sense. Although at the time I was very naive, I thought, you know, one can go into business and just kind of make it. But what I learned after losing or getting retrenched from my first job was that one has to truly stand out, especially on the African continent. You need to create something that is so dynamic and so unique and so true to your essence that no one and everyone can see, even in the dark, that is you. And that is why then I decided to study textile. I went into a textile diploma, also very naively. I kind of thought, you know what, I have the time, I can just do 10 diplomas while I'm here, and one of them will be textile, because I think textile was always my first love. I always loved working with paints and prints and making a mess. And so fashion was the next one, but the business was at heart. So whether I liked it or not, I was going to have to be an entrepreneur within the space of whatever it is that I would be making. I then went back to school to study textile, where I learned how to work with fabric and truly fall in love with the aestheticization of the South African contemporary aesthetic. This means that I looked at South African food, I looked at colors, I looked at our hair, I looked at our rituals, I looked at all the facets that make us who we are. And then condensed those things into prints and patterns and colors that spoke to us. Because in essence, I always wanted to create something that speaks directly to the heart of an African consumer. So then my first collection as a textile and fashion designer, because now, as you can get, I am sort of building this identity. It has gone from not being a city girl, then I am a fashion designer in Serati, and now I'm creating this textile thing. So I'm like, okay, so I'm a textile and fashion designer, and not just, you know. So at that point, I recall being quite despondent also towards the South African fashion industry. And thinking to myself, you know what, I'm a textile designer. I will identify as a textile designer, and I will not try to be a fashion designer. So I moved more into the interior space with my prints, because then by then in 2016, 2017, I had already created somewhat of an aesthetic, something that could be identified. I showcased my graduate textile work at Design Ndaba. And to my surprise, everybody understood what I was doing, even though I didn't. I was like, okay, that's great, this is lovely. And I think even at the time, I mean, I created an upcycled collection of clothing, things that were at the time very new. No one was upcycling in 2017 and 2018. No one really understood what it was. I was kind of also winging it and thinking, if we are going to start talking about sustainability on the African continent, one needs to have a stance. And my stance was taking product from Mr. Price, a jersey, a shirt, and reappropriating it with embroidery and print and creating something that becomes ours. And if you think about it, that is what most of what the South African aesthetic has been, where you look at what is contemporary now, but traditional to us, has been taking Western European and Asian design aesthetics and then Africanizing them and creating our own spin-off. So in essence, that is where I jumped off with the notion of being a fashion and textile designer. I would also then say that in a way, fashion always chased me down and beat me to the ground. I always tried to run away from being called a fashion designer. Only recently have I then said to myself, okay, I'm not going to run away anymore. I'm a fashion designer. I feel like it felt like I was in an AA meeting. Like, hi, I'm Ditiro and I'm a fashion designer. I had to really come up and acknowledge and take up that space for myself, because what it meant was that I had to also acknowledge that I was creating my own path, and this path is difficult. There is no one that I personally know who has ventured out into being a South African textile and fashion designer, female, black, oh my word, so many things that could, in essence, just bring you into a halt. But I said, yeah, I'm going to take up the space, and I did. So while at Design Ndaba, after Design Ndaba, the first time, I thought, okay, I'm going to go into this thing and I'm going to maybe do art. And then I did art because I believe in myself and I'm courageous and I'm bold. So I said I'm an artist. And I walked into spaces where artists were, and I took up space. And I was recognized and acknowledged. And then so goes me getting into the spaces like 100% Design, and then also collaborating with Zadia of Something Good on blankets that I upcycled for her, where I did a fiber art technique and built on kind of what she already had going. We went to Design Ndaba again, I think it was 2019 rather, and we showcased. And I would say graciously that the world was impressed, because from that platform, I was then invited by the presidency to create a uniform for the Soweto Gospel Choir. So in my head, that decision to become a textile designer, that decision to be a differentiator in my space, put me in the perfect position to say yes to opportunities that meant that I had to be unique. So creating a uniform for a world-renowned choir was normal. It was just like, oh yeah, I'm just making, because I'm already a fashion designer, I'm already an artist, I'm already a textile designer. So this is totally within my wheelhouse. So then COVID happened. And I feel like that blots out a good 2 years of my experience. And in that time, I realized that now that outside of, yes, creating an aesthetic, building a brand, creating a world, one also needs to think about how you articulate these things, how you go into spaces where academics are, and you explain what it is to be a South African designer. Now I'm speaking for those that are yet to come, who have also not yet understood and are still articulating and trying to find ways to articulate what it is to be South African in the design space, and doing research for art and fashion and textiles that really speak to what it is to be African. And that's where I am right now. I think this is probably going to be my life's work. I can't see a world where I'm outside of this world. So yes, in the academic space, still running around, doing my very best to be my very